Coming up, the New York Football Giants get the bounce-back performance they needed from Daniel Jones, but guess what? It just didn't matter because of an inexplicable coaching decision around the kicking position. Big Blue goes down on the road against the Commanders. We break down what went wrong, how Daniel Jones performed, the excellent Malik Nabers, -1 catch, and so much more on the defensive side of the football, all coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant podcast where you know that we are your host over here, Adam Arbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. In spite of an 0-2 start for the New York Football Giants, we're going to get into the season ramifications around that, obviously. But Andy, leave it to the New York Football Giants to have the first reaction from a Week 2 game be centered around the kicker and the injury and the decision or lack thereof to prepare to not have Graham Gano available potentially on Sunday, which by and large we could say, circle, underline, double stamp it, was the reason the Giants could not win that football game.
It's no question in my mind. You can sugarcoat this any way you want. Adam, this actually feels like the worst case scenario for the Giants. Like, I think everyone was wondering how Daniel Jones is going to play, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But like, it's almost worse that Daniel Jones played pretty good and the Giants lost the game. If he had played horrible, then you'd be like, well, at least like we've got a definitive answer. We know what the problem is. Let's address that in the offseason. This was on the coaches. This was on the general manager. How on earth does your kicker, who has had injuries in the past, have a groin injury, gets put on the injury report yesterday, and you don't elevate the kicker that you have on the practice squad to the roster as insurance? Adam, look at what happens when the Giants don't have a kicker. They literally could not function in special teams. It was embarrassing. It is one of the bigger miscues by Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen of their tenure as the New York Giants coach. And I firmly believe it cost them a win in a game that they should have won. The offense played well enough for the Giants to win the game. The Giants scored 3 touchdowns. The Commanders scored 0 touchdowns. The Giants are the first team in NFL history to score 3 touchdowns, not allow a touchdown, and lose in regulation. All of this is inexcusable, and it goes right to the feet of Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. There is no other way around it. Adam, if you walked away with a different feeling, please let me know. But I look at this and say, if competent moves would have been done the right way with the field goal kicker, the Giants win that game, and the Giants are 1-1 instead of 0-2, and people start looking at the draft.
100%. I mean, listen, I say the phrase 100% a lot on this podcast, usually because I feel like we're making definitive statements about this organization, decisions they need to make, the draft class, free agency, knowing areas to address. And when you come into a game like this, like, listen, are there a lot of mechanics probably to manage around the roster, who's up, who's down, practice squad designations, sending a player down or up, and everything that it means? Of course there is. Of course there is. But you take it and you're watching the game on Sunday, you see the kickoff from Graham Gano. He runs down the field to try to make a play, reaches back for his hamstring, and you think it's a hamstring, I should say. Oh, something came up a little bit lame there. That could be a concern. If that was what happened isolated to itself, you'd say, okay, well, what can you do? A guy gets hurt on game day, you start to scramble. It's not like NFL teams carry multiple kickers on game day. That's not the way that it works. They go down, they get a touchdown. Gillen tries to put through the extra point. He misses that. From there on out, you're in full we cannot kick mode. You're also in a bit of a problem because later in the game, Gillen ends up shorting the designated zone on the kickoff as well, because he's trying his best to get that job done for the special teams unit at that point as well. But then you find out from Dan Duggan, who went justifiably, I think, up and in on the organization with this, that on Saturday, Graham Gano was dealing with an injury, and you have until 4 o'clock on Saturday to make any type of decisions you want, give injury designations, etc. I don't know who they would have sent down, what it would have looked like. I can paint a picture where you could have just as well not had Gillen be active for the 53 on Sunday and not even punt the ball ever, just to make sure that you had a guy that could kick the ball when necessary. Whatever the moves that could have been made, something should have been done. And instead, to your point, Brian Daboll, the medical staff communicating the necessary information so that you can say to Joe Shane, we got to figure something out here. We need to bring up our young kicker who looked good in the preseason, looked good in training camp, and we could rely on to knock through a couple of extra points at a minimum. We need to make some type of decision here. Instead, you go into the game, you have the injury risk, you end up having Gano go downfield, probably should just be walking off after he kicks the ball off, given that he has an injury risk. And then instead, you find yourself being unable to kick an extra point, being unable to kick field goals on at least 2 possessions, if not 3. So you end up leaving potentially. We don't have to go all the distance of every single point counts here, but there's a potential for 10 points out there. Give me 7 of them, and it's a different game at the end. And of course, it only could happen that the Giants go for it. We'll talk about Nabers, but they don't get it. And then it's Washington who turns around and ends up getting the last-second field goal that wins them the game as time expires.
Adam, I'm going to make you even more angry right now. Are you ready
Thanks.
for that? So you said, I don't know what other roster moves would have had to happen. Even off show, we were talking, you were like, I bet you there's 5 guys on the active roster that we could have not had dress on game day, and having a backup kicker would have been more important. Adam, they only activated 52 people for this game. They had an extra roster spot to be able to activate anyone. And you know what they said? They said they would rather have air than a contingency plan in special teams. And this is infuriating to me. It's not like you had to decide, do we need a backup?
I missed that nugget. My Lord. Yeah, dude, who needs every
think about how available? That's why it's so inexcusable. It's not like, oh, we needed the roster spot because we had to have an extra lineman because someone's dealing with something. They literally activated less people than they were allowed to by rule. And so there's no getting around it. If you know that Graham Gano is dealing with a groin injury and he pops up before 4 o'clock on Saturday, there is literally no risk to activating an extra kicker when you have the roster spot. It is inexcusable, and this might be the worst. I'm trying to think of like how far I go with this, but it easily might be the worst decision that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have made, outside of potentially giving Daniel Jones the contract. You have to have a contingency plan. Adam, special teams has been an issue for Joe Shane and Brian Daboll over their career. Last year, they don't have a contingency plan. They put Eric Gray back there. He's a mess. He gets hurt. Week 1, Gunnar Olszewski obviously comes up lame. Don't have a contingency plan. Darius Slayton is back there muffing punts. Week 2 comes around. Your kicker is dealing with a groin injury, pulls his hamstring on the first play. Who would have saw that coming? That one injury leads to another. Adam, it is malpractice. That's what it is. And it's unfortunate because the Giants played well enough to win the game, and the organization, this falls squarely on the organization not allowing their team the best chance to win.
Now, by the way, too, practice squad players moving up to the main roster, just like last season, teams now have more flexibility with using practice squad players on game day. Practice squad players can be activated on game day before the team announces their inactives 90 minutes before game time. The player doesn't have to be elevated from the practice squad to the main roster for this move. This can happen with up to 2 practice squad players per week. The player is now able to be elevated 3 times per season, and to be activated a 4th time requires the player to be signed to the regular roster. This makes it easier for teams to have players that they know and trust on game day, and also not have to subject them to waivers when they are signed to the main roster and cut to get back to the practice squad. So just some more clarifying language there that doubles and triples down on what Andy is mentioning. And this actually came care of, ironically, SB Nation, but covering the Washington Commanders from Scott Jennings put this out there at the end of the summer, August 28th, heading into the regular season. So the opportunity, again, is you had at any point along the way to bring him up. And one of the things you talk about is coming up and down, some risk there about how many times. For the instance that you're in right now, and the potential that Graham Gano gets hurt and is going to be down for an extended amount of time anyway, you could have turned around and said any player that you want, if you had to, had the extra spot anyway, but if you had to send someone down, you would have been fine. We can bring you up and down 3 times over the course of this season. So pick a guy that has very little risk of ever getting sent down again, but isn't being used right now. Go ahead and put him down, and then bring up the kicker. But instead, you don't do that, and there's no risk of the kicker who you maybe like and don't want to see get ejected from the roster or someone else pick him up. There's no risk of losing him either. So there was literally no risk and no reasonable explanation for not having this taken care of. You should have had 2 kickers on your roster on Sunday. Simple as that. And instead, you go into a game that you had to win. Coming up here in a second, we're just going to, everybody knows this. We're going to remind you what it means to go 0-2. Remind you what it means for the Giants season. And Brian Daboll was asked after the game whether or not he thinks his job security is in jeopardy following an 0-2 start. I don't even know if they were asking specifically about the decision-making process with the kicker, just being 0-2 in your third season. We're going to get into that and a lot more here as we continue to have a frustrating post-game reaction to the Giants' loss on the road to division rival Washington Commanders. We'll get back into it in just one moment. Andy, if I sound like I'm a little bit all over the place, because there's a lot of things to be pissed off about. I'll just tell you at a high level, the Giants are now 0-2, and it's only a 6% chance that 0-2 teams make the playoffs. Now, that dismisses the fact that the Giants weren't a team that were going to make the playoffs this year anyway. But now, all of a sudden, it does firmly entrench you. And if you're a member of the fan base that says, hey, we need to be bad and lose all these games and get a high draft pick, your wish is going to come true here. Because before we get back into this and then get into some performances specifically out of this game, which, again, is a real bummer because there were some good performances, nay, great ones from a player like Malik Nabers. But if you sit there at 0-2 now, we said coming into the year, the Vikings game, the Commanders game, first 2 weeks. Now, the Browns don't look like the same team we thought they were on paper, but they still have a very good defense. And then you're going to play the Cowboys, who just got absolutely walloped on Sunday as well. But this is the part of the schedule where you said, well, if you can get the first 2 wins and then you're 2-3, even 2-4, you still have some chance to negotiate your schedule a little bit. Instead, you're 0-2, and there's no longer. You can circle the Carolina Panthers game in Germany. That's the only game on this schedule that you can go into now thinking, we have a chance to be successful here. Maybe you'll push back on that because the Giants were in this game and capable of beating the Washington Commanders. But I remind you, the Washington Commanders are a team that got absolutely licked by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who look like a strong team this season. But the Giants were battling against the Commanders. Even with a kicker, this would have been a one-possession game throughout. They would have been clawing their way, and that would have been good. I would have felt good about them winning the game if they could have gotten there. But it's just, this really puts the entire season into perspective before we get back into the frustration around this decision or lack thereof from the coaching staff.
It's really tough. We mentioned it before. You said 6% chance. And guess what? The Cowboys inexplicably lost. You could have sent the Commanders to 0-2. The Eagles play on Monday night. They could very easily lose the game to the Falcons. The Giants could have been 1-1, tied for the division lead with a road division win. And while you may say, Andy, you're crazy, like, why are you even thinking about that? What does it mean? But it's like after 2 weeks, you could have been tied for the lead with a road win in the division. And yet now it feels like because of all of these decisions, that the Giants season is slipping away from them after 2 weeks. And it's tough because we're going to get into Malik Nabers. You watch a guy like Malik Nabers play, and you have to be excited about what you saw at him. It's just so unfortunate that it had to come in such a soul-crushing loss for the Giants in week 2.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it really is. And again, we'll start to have conversations about looking at the college level and what it means to maybe get your franchise quarterback. But at a minimum, as this season unfolds, one thing that I think fans can sometimes look past when you believe in Brian Daboll and think that he's a good coach, or maybe you believe in Joe Schoen and think that he's a good GM, seems been wavering on Joe Schoen coming into this year. Now maybe you start to cast a little bit of shadow over top of Brian Daboll. You're going to go through a 2-15, a 3-14 season, and then bring back Brian Daboll. Listen, I don't care what picture you paint here, because guess what happened on Sunday? Daniel Jones had a decent game. So as we get into some of these players that perform well, it's going to be hard to look at this team at a high level and say, well, it wasn't about the coaching. It wasn't about the GM. It was a byproduct of XYZ over the course of a 17-game season. Before we get to Daniel Jones, you mentioned it there. Malik Nabers. Listen, we wanted to have a moment. We wanted to feel like Malik Nabers, who had a good first game against the Minnesota Vikings, and we wanted to see that, though. Let's put it on tape. And by the way, Marvin Harrison Jr., good Lord, have yourself a first quarter for the Arizona Cardinals after a very quiet week 1 in his rookie season. You turn around and you get Malik Nabers on 18 targets, man. 27 total passes, 28, thrown by Daniel Jones. 18 of them went to Malik Nabers. He caught 10 of them, $127, touchdown, only a long of 28. So these were like really nice, consistent plays, all the route combinations, everything that you've seen from him in camp and going back and looking at LSU. And then unfortunately on the 4th down play, because you can't kick a field goal, you have to go for it on 4th and 4. You find him on the sideline. It's a good ball from Daniel Jones, and he drops it. And you see the frustration. And listen, everybody said all the right things, and he's pissed off, and he's going to be pissed off until next week when he can go out of tone for it. But we're not going to sit here at any point along the way and act like that drop pass, which was critical in that moment of the game, has anything to do with the Giants winning or losing this game. 10 catches, $127, Take Malik Nabers off the field, you're just having another conversation about what a team with no number one wideout looks like. So it was brutal, though, that an amazing game got capped off, unfortunately, with that type of moment for Malik.
Yeah, it's really tough because he played so well, Adam. Like he
Yeah.
played phenomenally, and it's just obviously there's that critical fourth down play. To your point, the Giants should have never been in that situation because they would have kicked a field goal if they had a healthy field goal kicker to take the lead in the game. So it's really tough. But man, Malik Nabers looked awesome. It's exciting to talk about the promise and like what the future looks like. Malik Nabers is the future of the New York Giants. He also showed his toughness out there, Adam. He early on in the game, they had the defensive back for the Commanders basically target him by spearing him with his helmet. I don't know if you remember that play early on. Obviously,
yes.
Dinged him up quite a bit. It looked like a very, very dirty play, like launching his helmet into Malik's helmet. But he was tough. He was dependable. He was all the things that the Giants wanted when they drafted him out of LSU. And so, man, it's exciting to see, even with Daniel Jones basically turning around and saying, I'm going to just keep feeding Malik Nabers. Other teams couldn't do anything about it. And if this is a sign of what can happen between Jones and Nabers for the rest of the season, you have to feel encouraged about at least the connection that the two of them are starting to build.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, let's go high level, overall for this season, for beyond this season. Malik Nabers is clearly that dude, right? So whether it's Daniel Jones for the remainder of this season or another quarterback next year, if you're going to bring in a rookie, if you're going to bring in a different veteran, whatever it's going to look like, at least you know that he's going to have an elite number one weapon to throw to. And obviously, Daniel Jones is only going to come out there and say, yeah, I'm just going to keep throwing him the ball, because that's what we need to do. He's clearly the best option we have on the offensive side. Now, if we turn our attention over to Daniel Jones and his game, it unfortunately does get overshadowed here. Listen, I was going to say, let's have a, kind of a balanced perspective, because it is the Washington Commanders and Daniel Jones just seems to play well against him. We know they're not that good of a defense. And I was going to cool off the game a little bit, but let's be realistic. 16 of 28, 178 yards, carried it 5 times for 32. And I actually thought did the read option very effectively and was very decisive in the opportunities when he ran with his legs. Threw 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, QBR of 63.3. This was the game that you wanted from Daniel Jones. It doesn't make it this isn't, oh, don't worry about it, everything's going to be fine. The next 2 years after this are going to be beautiful for the contract. No, that's not what we're saying. But we came into this week saying Daniel Jones needs to have a bounce back game if you're going to have any optimism around the season. Now, again, ironically, it didn't matter that he had a bounce back game because the Giants failed to have a kicker capable of putting it through between the posts. But you at least look at that and say, okay, now does he have to go back out and show it again and show it again? Of course he does. But he checked the box that he needed to in this game. And I thought the offense, I hate to even give, Daboll some credit here, but the game plan seemed more expansive than it did a week prior against the Minnesota Vikings. The offense seemed to be in a bit more of a rhythm on Sunday.
Daniel Jones played well. There's no getting around it. And the whole idea is he didn't play great. He wasn't the best player on the field, but he did exactly what every fan wanted him to do. Play, smart, solid football, get the ball to Malik Nabers, show that you can move the ball down the field and sustain multiple drives. He did everything that you would want him to do. The Giants on offense scored 3 touchdowns. If the Giants score 3 offensive touchdowns in a game, they should win the game. End of story. You're talking about at least putting up 21 points, if not getting a field goal or something else, 24, 27. We've been living in a world where the Giants are scoring 14, 13, 11. They played well enough on offense to win, and Jones was a major factor on that. Now, if he goes and has a terrible game against the Browns, it's going to bring up all the same questions again. But it's nice, at least for 1 week, to be able to say it wasn't the quarterback that was the main issue for the Giants. This time, it just happens to be the coaching staff and some of the decisions that were made in the front office, which, as I started out the show, I don't know which is worse, but at least for 1 week, we don't have to talk about should Daniel Jones start next week or is his job in jeopardy? Should we start Drew Lock? Daniel Jones looked well. If he plays like this, the Giants will be competitive on offense. I can't say the same thing about the defense, though, Adam.
I will say, as we're going to get into the defense to close out today's episode, I stopped short of saying the Giants will be competitive on offense. Remember, they played the Washington Commanders. So the performance is good. I take that away as a positive, but I stopped short of saying, and now they'll be competitive. They looked terrible on offense against the Vikings. They're going to play a very good Browns defense in week number 3. Like it's going to be a week-to-week evaluation on Daniel Jones, on the offense, on the coaching staff, on everybody effectively. But for this week, He played well, and that's all that you can ask anybody on the roster to do. Put together one good week, and then show me you can do it again the next. Coming up here in a second, let's talk about that defensive side of the football. Here's a shocker. They were really bad against the run. Again, seems like a new problem on that side of the football that leads or contributes to another loss, 0-2 Big Blue. We'll dive in coming up next. Closing things out here, Andy, and listen, this is nitpicking, I think, a little bit because we are talking about a defensive side of the football. Now, the secondary for a second straight week, we see 23 of 29, 226 for Jaden Daniels. Very comfortable in terms of getting the ball out to his receivers. The Giants did pick up 5 sacks in this game, held them to a 45.9 QBR. So overall, in spite of allowing, some success through the air, it feels like that's going to be the theme for this secondary. Hey, keep it in front of us. Don't give up really big plays and try to live with those results. Oops-a-daisy, though. Brian Robinson Jr., 17 carries for 133 yards. And you may say, that's a massive day. Yes. And then 10 carries for Jaden Daniels for 44. And then 8 carries for Austin Eckler for 38 yards. 215 rushing yards on the ground. And this was one of the concerns we talked about coming into the year. It's amazing to trade for Brian Burns. We know that he's a great player. But unfortunately, when you have an elite talent like Dexter Lawrence in the middle and then 2 speed pass rushers primarily in Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns, you see, if we double team, there was a couple of plays, man, where Dexter Lawrence got blown out of the hole, right up the gut. These were not dynamic, excellent edge rushes and getting around the corner and setting up every amazing block. A lot of this stuff was between the tackles, and the Giants just got beat out of the line of scrimmage here again for a second straight week. The rushing defense, is a real concern for this team.
You can't give up 200 yards on the ground and expect to win many games. That just shows
you can barely give up 100 yards a game and expect to win sometimes in rushing, right?
Right. So you're giving up over 200 yards, especially against a rookie quarterback, Adam. It's like if you make them more one-dimensional, you force him to have the learning curves of the NFL so much faster. Instead, they had both the run and the pass available to them. And I know that sounds very basic, but it's true. They had 29 passing plays. They had 35 rushing attempts. They were running the ball all over the Giants, and the Giants could do nothing about it. And listen, there's a couple things that I think about. One, Drew Phillips looked great. He was all over the field. He had a sack, 12 tackles. Micah McFadden was all over the place. Jason Pinnock had 2 sacks. There were good things. Bobby Okereke was good up the middle, but they just can't stop the run. And my question to you, Adam, is, is this going to be the Achilles heel of the Giants? Are they not going to be able to get themselves off the field the entire season because they can't stop anyone in the run?
Boy, no, I can't label this the Achilles heel of the Giants. I can label potentially 3 different aspects of offense and defense that are going to matter. Malik Nabers has an amazing game, but where else are you going to on the offensive side of the ball? We have a separate conversation about Jalen Hyatt to have this week as well when it comes to what they're doing in the wide receiver room, the tight end room. Yes, I ended up having an issue in fantasy and picked up Theo Johnson and said, I got to roll the dice. I'm running a double tight end league here. I have no options. Ironically, former Giant Evan Ingram went down. He didn't even see the field in this game, really. So, there's all these other areas that I think matter here. To me, it's roster construction is the Achilles heel of this team. It's not balanced in all phases. Every game, I think, is going to offer different issues. And whether or not you can look at it and say, well, the Giants kept everything in front of them, high completion percentage, but they didn't give up any big plays. I think it's always going to be this push and pull. If you get home and you disrupt the quarterback with a speed rush, then they're going to run the ball. If you try to stuff that, then you're going to open up and get exposed. So in some ways, it's not an excuse, but I think the Giants were like living with the poison of not wanting to give up big passing plays and then just slowly get gouged and beat up in the running game. So I just think we knew the defense was going to be weak. Right now, the rush defense looks like it's the most exposed, but I think that's an active decision from Shane Bowen in that unit.
I mean, the Giants lost the turnover battle 1-0. Obviously, that Devin Singletary fumble was at a critical moment and a critical time. The Giants' time of possession, they lost the time of possession 37 minutes to 22 minutes, basically. The other team had the ball for an entire quarter more than the Giants.
They started this game on a 10-minute drive. The opening drive of this game was 10 minutes. So that set the tone right there for what was going to happen all throughout Sunday, in spite of all the other things we talk about today.
So the Washington Commanders are scoring on every possession. They're putting pressure on the Giants offense. The Giants offense is responding. Unfortunately, we can't kick balls and we can't kick field goals. We can't kick extra points. And if you don't think that mattered in the game, you're crazy because it did. But defensively, I saw a lot of people, the bend don't break mentality, bend don't break of Shane Bowen's system. This is not sustainable. You cannot allow teams to score on every defensive possession. It doesn't matter whether it's a touchdown or a field goal. Obviously, you want to eliminate how many times they can get deep into the red zone and score. But I don't know. I mean, it didn't feel like the defense needed to step up when we needed it most, especially after that Malik Nabers play where he doesn't catch that fourth down play. There's 2 minutes to go. And I sat there and said, this defense can't stop them. There's no way they're going to stop them. Guess what they did? March down the field, get right into field goal range, and they kicked the winning field goal. The defense has to step up and say, we're going to pick up the offense on that one play. We're going to get one stop in this game to get our team the ball back, and we couldn't do it. And so for me, it's like, man, if the offense can play like this consistently, we're going to be in every game. But if the defense can't get off the field and can't get stops, what is it going to be for? That's the real question I have about the defense.
For sure. I just stopped short because we knew coming into the season the defense was going to be a problem. And again, whether or not the field goals were available, certainly. And so we can sit here and say it's 18 points, missed extra point, went for 2-point conversion. So call it 20 and put 2 more field goals on the board. It's 26 points against the Washington Commanders. And we'll find out. The next couple of games, play against Cleveland. I mean, listen, the Dallas Cowboys got absolutely torched, so they should be susceptible. I think in the next 2 weeks, we'll see a really good version of a defense in Cleveland, and then we'll see a team, to your point, if it's real and you can have some offensive success, then you'll show it against Dallas. No matter if it ends up being 42-24 loss, you'll still show the ability to move the ball and to be effective. All of this, at the end of the day, Andy, really falls into the same pot. It's just another, what the heck is going on here? We already had the questions about Daniel Jones coming into the season, the contract given out. We already had some questions about what happened in the draft and whether or not you fully addressed the areas of need that you were supposed to. All of these things combine, and now you throw in a little Brian Daboll and Joe Shane and what were we doing on game day? It leaves such a bad taste again in Giants fans' mouths early in the season. And I don't care if you're pro tank, go get the quarterback. That's great. There's still going to be questions to answer here, and you're not just going to plug in a rookie quarterback next season and say, oh my goodness, so many of the issues have gone away. You'll have a draft class, you'll have free agency, but who's going to be making those decisions and who's going to be coaching on Sunday?
At the end of the day, there's going to be a whole host of things that we want to talk about in the game specifically, Adam. There's a couple of things I want to highlight, like why did Tyrone Tracy only get 1 carry in the game? Why was he not utilized at all? Where was Eric Gray? Didn't have a rushing attempt or a receiving target. You mentioned Theo Johnson was non-existent. Daniel Bellinger only gets 2 snaps in the whole game. To me, it's like, yeah, the offense played well enough to win, but there's still all these questions. And that's why I think you're not even having cautious optimism yet. You're kind of having reserving judgment until the next week on this offense. It feels like if the identity is going to be we're going to target Malik Nabers 20 times in a game and nothing else matters, like that's gonna wear thin pretty quickly, and teams are just gonna double Malik Nabers and say, figure out another way to move your offense. I just have a lot of questions. It feels like the Giants played well enough to win. They didn't win. The 0-2 start is the kiss of death. And here we sit. The Giants find another way, inexcusably, to lose a game that they should have potentially won.
64 total offensive plays for the Commanders, 52 for the New York Football Giants. And in spite of saying that Daniel Jones did have a good day, to your point, it's 16 carries for 95 yards. We'll talk about the fumble for Devin Singletary, obviously, 5 for Jones, as we mentioned, and then 1 carry for Tyrone Tracy Jr. I don't know whether or not I need to see every running back in the room, but I certainly need to see Devin Singletary in a game where he was having success by and large, continue to be fed that rock. There's something about balancing the time of possession. There's something about controlling the game when you know you don't have your kicker available. There's a lot of different things here. They all add up to the Giants losing, being 0-2, and staring down a very difficult season, and probably now putting onto the list of questions more names rather than taking them off. That being the case, though, Andy mentioned there's specific game situations we want to talk about beyond the inexplicable kicker decision. There's also some fantasy value that I hit on over this past week as well for you. Betting corner from Andy, too. There's a lot of things, obviously, updating injury reports as well. Guys went down in this one, wouldn't you know it? So we're going to start to turn our attention over to the early line with Cleveland and work our way through this week. And yeah, start to put an eye on the college games each and every Saturday, because there's going to be big talent there and ones that are more likely than not to be on the short list for the Giants in the upcoming draft. We'll do all of that, not only on YouTube, where you can subscribe and turn on your alerts, but also on the podcast feed. Download, subscribe, leave a glowing review if at all possible for you. But until next time, until those best times, as Andrew Makowitz, in spite of it all, wants, needs, and nay, demands the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.